Okay, so I have the great pleasure of introducing the facilitator to this plenary session. And I think many of you in this room, look, thank you, Sherry. Many of you in this room probably know Margie Wallen as a colleague. Woo! Some of you know Margie for one of the reasons that I love her most is that she is incredibly persistent. And sometimes she decides that you have a skill or a knowledge base that she would like to access, and she will just pick up the phone and make friends with you. This is one of the things that I love the most about Margie. Some of you might not know that Margie has spent most of her life either in Chicago or in New Orleans, which explains for me her deep and abiding love and passion for classic R&B and soul music. She also has a deep and abiding passion for the mussels at the 4th Street restaurant in Portland, Maine. I can't explain that. It's not a cultural thing. I can't explain that. So what I will say is that I benefit from her deep and abiding love for the mussels at the 4th Street restaurant in Portland, Maine, because every time she comes to town, I get to eat well. The other thing that I benefit from is her tremendous collegial and personal wisdom. And I think that you will also. So with no further ado, here's my friend Margie Wallen.
Thank you. Wow. I think this is, knowing that we're on live stream, I said to the panel, I think this is as close as we're going to get to being TV stars. But anyway, thank you so much, Judy. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with a lot of colleagues in Maine for a number of years. I'm particularly excited tonight to be joined by 4 deeply experienced trailblazers who have planned, implemented, and strategically supported partnerships serving thousands of infants, toddlers, and their families in comprehensive, high-quality early learning and development programs. The purpose of tonight's panel is to share a variety of approaches to early Head Start child care partnerships, including partnering with family child care home providers in rural Maine, 89 community-based child care centers in the city of Chicago, a large-scale program serving 2,500 children in 20 center-based locations throughout Oklahoma, and the only early Head Start child care partnership program currently administered by a state agency in Pennsylvania. We've heard, go Pennsylvania. So we have heard a lot this afternoon about the what behind early Head Start child care partnerships, and we're really hoping tonight that we really can get into the how. So we're looking forward for the panel to share what's worked, what hasn't worked, and lessons learned in planning and implementing their partnerships, which we hope will inform your thinking about systemic strategies that set the conditions for designing and sustaining effective partnerships, including technical assistance, training, support, and state child care policies. I'm going to begin by briefly introducing the panelists. You have longer bios in your meeting packets, so this will be brief. We have, starting at the end, Sue Reynolds, who coordinates the Prevention Initiative Center-Based Program for the Chicago Public Schools. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you. Talk closer to the mic. Sue coordinates the Prevention Initiative Center-Based Programs for the Chicago Public Schools and the Office of Early Childhood Education, which is an early Head Start-inspired effort that supports almost 2,800 infants and toddlers in 315 center-based classrooms throughout the city of Chicago. Next is Kathy Colfer. Kathy is the Director of Child and Family Services at the Kennebec Valley Community Action Program and Director of Educare Central Maine. Kathy administered Home Start, a 13-year partnership between KVCAP and family child care providers who provided comprehensive early Head Start and Head Start services throughout rural Maine. There you go, the Mainers. Amy Fain, who I think I'm going to clap for because she's missing a state team from Oklahoma, but we're so thrilled to have Amy here with us tonight. She is the manager of the Oklahoma Early Childhood Program, which is administered by the Community Action Project of Tulsa County. This is a project that is statewide, serving 2,500 children throughout Oklahoma. It is a birth through age 3 partnership, so we'll have Amy sort of talk about that as well. And these are programs that are child care centers that meet specific early Head Start performance standards. And last but certainly not least, Tracey Campanini, so we'll have the Pennsylvania team cheer. Tracey is the director of the Bureau of Early Learning Services and the State Head Start Collaboration Office, director for the Pennsylvania Office of Child Development and Early Learning. Tracey oversees OCDEL's federal Early Head Start Child Care Partnerships grants, among her many other responsibilities. So this is how we're going to work tonight's panel. I've asked each of the panelists to give a 5-minute overview of her partnership to give you the approach and context. And in keeping with the exercise that you all did of drawing your own partnership, you'll find in your meeting packets, we asked each of the panelists to draw her partnership and to also give you a little summary overview, which includes lessons learned. So you have that as part of your take-home materials. After each panelist's remarks, we're going to have a panel conversation where I'm going to pose questions to the panel, and we'll have respondents, and then we'll open it up for audience questions. And if we're really running a little bit late, we'll kind of cut off the canned panel questions and go to your questions because it's most important to really hear from you. I also want to say that we're thrilled that the 4 panelists for tonight will all be here tomorrow during the day, so that I urge you to find them and ask questions. They're all here as resource people and really willing to engage with you. So without further ado, we will ask, is it Sue?
Yeah.
To begin. I think we'll go this way.
All right. Thanks, Margie. Can everybody hear me? All right. Hopefully that won't happen again. Can everybody hear me? Yes. No, you can't hear me? Yeah. All right, I'll start with the mic. My name is Sue Reynolds. I work here in the city of Chicago. And I guess I would just like to start by saying one of the things that we do with our programs often when we start conversations about partnership is we talk about the hopes and dreams of the children and the families that they're going to be working with. And for me, when I think about hopes and dreams, I think about a night like tonight. I know that we spend a lot of time hoping and dreaming for the opportunity to have a bunch of tax dollars come in to service children and families. So it is a hope and dream to them, and it's kind of exciting to be a part of this. Our program in Chicago is based, actually it's money that comes from the Illinois State Board of Education. That money is part of the Early Childhood Block Grant. The Early Childhood Block Grant is a very large portion of money that many state advocates over many years advocated for early childhood to be a priority in the state. And then part of the Early Childhood Block Grant is a piece of the money that we call the Birth to 3 Set Aside. And this is a percentage of the money that comes to Birth to 3 programs. And this Birth to 3 Set Aside is many years in the making. And it comes into the Illinois State Board of Education, and then Chicago gets a percentage of that money. So we get 33% of that money, and the money then goes into either schools to do Preschool for All, which is our state pre-K program, or it goes to the community-based agencies, which is where our Birth to 3 Set Aside is housed in Chicago. And these are community-based agencies in almost every community in Chicago. Most of these programs have a Preschool for All component, but not all. Like Margie said, we have about 89 programs right now. We started out with more. So you always start with a larger amount and then it kind of whittles down, but we are at about 89 now. So this journey that we began about, I would say, 5 years ago. We had the money coming into the Chicago Public Schools, but we didn't necessarily have a program model. We were giving the money out, but we weren't sure how well it was being used. And so in a conversation with the State Board of Ed, we started to talk about what are the quality indicators that we wanted in our program. And of course, the first place we went was Early Head Start, because we have some really extraordinary things going on in Early Head Start when we think about quality. But then the question becomes, what are the pieces of Early Head Start that we should start with? And so for us, we really kind of whittled down what we felt like was good quality indicators that programs could take in small pieces. So we started with things like screening, developmental assessment, professional development planning, program evaluation, and then moved to group size ratio, staff qualifications. Then we moved to family engagement, and we have this final piece, which is our infant specialization in the programs, and the final kind of lay on top of which is continuity of relationships. So that process of implementing all of those quality components has been a 5-year process. It has been slow because we know that change takes a little time, and you can't overnight qualified staff. So that is one of the things that we learned, that it was a slow rollout for us, and that maybe not necessarily be the case for all of you, but it did seem to work for us. We do serve children birth through age 3, and the money is actually lay on top of the child care dollar. So a program will have a group of families and children, and they are qualified for child care, and our eligibility matches the eligibility for child care. So the service is provided for the family full day, full time, and they are a prevention initiative, and they have to have these quality components. We didn't include things like requiring NACE accreditation or things like that immediately, because we knew that those were pretty big things to jump into with programs. What we found, though, was that as programs were starting to do these quality components, they really jumped on it themselves, which was a kind of nice bonus to put the onus on them and allow them to kind of jump into a accreditation process. The other thing that has been going on in our state, which is a little bit exciting, is that we had a non-mandatory QRS system, and has now moved to a mandatory quality rating system. And one of the nice things is that many of our programs took on the non-mandatory, and now they're quickly going to move into the mandatory system. So that's just a brief kind of overview of our programs. And so I'm going to pass the mic on.
Well, I'm going to try. Can you hear me this way? Not without this. Okay, then I'm going to try it this way. Well, good evening. I am Kathy Colfer. I am from Maine. I work for a community action program. We are an early Head Start grantee, a Head Start grantee, a child care provider, and also we have an Educare Central Maine location. I want to talk a little bit tonight about our partnerships with family child care. It was a Head Start, early Head Start model that met the Head Start performance standards, and it was called Home Start. And Home Start began in Maine in about 1998. It was really the brainchild of a couple agencies, one that I work for, and the other was a Catholic charities organization that worked very closely with family child care providers, and very often, saw the need and heard them talk about their professional development needs and other supports that they needed. So after numerous conversations and meetings with those providers, really to draw on their expertise and to hear more about their needs, the Home Start model was developed to meet those needs. Our approach was fairly simple. We would partner with family child care providers and provide coaching and monetary supports to really reach mutually agreed upon goals that would meet the Head Start performance standards. We did not act in a supervisory role, but rather a contractual one. There were many providers who were very excited to partner with us and go through our orientation systems, but to be really honest, when it came to working with them in their homes, it took much longer to develop those really trusting relationships to move the work forward. So over time, we really had to hone our provider selection and orientation processes to better incorporate relationship building activities, but also to be more focused on attitudes about professional development and growth. So really, what did this look like on the ground? Each contracted child care provider had a Home Start coordinator, which was one of our staff. They were really the linchpins, our community linchpins and field workers that really coordinated services between the grantee and our community partners. They really had three overarching functions. The first was to be a coach to providers and really to work with them on child development, curriculum, and assessments or any other goals that have been identified. The second was to support parents in accessing needed resources and connecting and encouraging them to be engaged in our governance systems. That was critical to us. And the third was coordinating access for providers and parents to targeted supports through our services or through community-based services. So each provider had access to all of our content specialists and systems through their Home Start coordinator. And I'll give you a few examples of what that looked like. We had our registered dietitians working with providers on menu plannings. We had our mental health consultant with regular visits to our child care homes, and usually it was 2 times annually, but more if needed. Our education content leads, disability specialists, and infant toddler specialists provided technical assistance to providers. Our health systems monitored health records and worked with parents and providers on all areas related to child health. And we had a fairly well-designed and organized substitute training system. So the providers all had access to our substitutes who had the background checks and trainings. And all the providers engaged in our annual self-assessment processes, and that was through many different venues for meetings, feedback loops. You know, they even made presentations to the governance boards. Another thing, area that we worked together on is because we held a CCDF contract, we really helped co-manage recruitment and selection. And I have to say, Louise did not pay me to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Family child care providers operate on a very thin margin, profit margin, if any at all, and that really they have to rely on full enrollment and full collection of parent fees to even think about improving quality, let alone remaining, in some cases, sustainability. So we really helped manage the recruitment and enrollment and attendance in really a manner that kept those contracted slots full at all times. So in addition to the CCDF rates, we also enhanced those rates with Head Start funds. So for all those contracted children, the provider received an enhanced rate, but we also provided access to startup funds, educational supply funds, professional development stipends, access to mandatory and voluntary trainings and learning communities, things like first aid kits, parent activity funds, and we even provided accident liability insurance stipends for them. The families enrolled did receive the full cadre of family engagement supports, mainly from program staff, as we worked more with providers and they got more comfortable and more skilled in working with families. Then it was more of a shared responsibility, but our program staff did bear a lot of that. How am I doing on time? Okay, I got a couple more minutes. The model really did include some successes many successes, but the three that really stick out in my mind is, first of all, we had significant gains in child outcomes. Parents really reported being much more engaged in their child's learning and feeling more connected to their provider, and providers felt really more equipped to support child development and really felt supported through their learning communities. You've probably noticed by now, as I've been talking, that I keep talking about this in the past tense. And that is because that program ceased in 2010, really for two primary reasons. The first is in the state, we eliminated CCDF contracts, which really gave us the ability to support a shared services approach to administrative functions, and that was gone. We also, without contracts, did not have the ability to qualify families for service or assist them in managing full enrollment or providing any back office supports or even consistent payments. The second contributing factor was the impending Head Start redesignation system. Although throughout Home Start's tenure, there were never any deficiencies that I'm aware of, but was considered considerably greater risk working in a contractual relationship versus being a direct service provider. So I think that's probably my 5 minutes, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Amy Fain. Sorry about that. I'll try not to do that again. I work for Community Action Project in Tulsa, and it's an anti-poverty agency that also has Head Start. We're a grantee for Head Start, Early Head Start, but then we also have other services for families, first home buyer program, tax programs, things like that. I'm the manager of the Oklahoma Early Childhood Program, and our grant started in fiscal year 2006-2007 when we started serving children, and our state legislator launched this pioneering effort with the Department of Education. So that's who we work under, is the Department of Education. And we started out as a pilot program for the first 5 years, and then subsequent years we've been now officially named the Oklahoma Early Childhood Program, which is a mouthful. We went from SPP to OECP, but OECP is our official acronym because we like those in early childhood. So we're funded through private contributions and also state funds. The ratio is 60% private contributions, which is a match program, and the providers are, they have to find that match, and that's a challenge for some of our providers, especially in our rural areas and different parts of our state. And then it's a 40% state match. Now we can also layer that with CACFP funding and also TANF, and so those are kind of the funding streams for the program. OECP has worked to raise the quality of the centers for low-income children. Like Margie said, we're through 3, which is originally when the grant was written, we weren't, and we really had that gap in Oklahoma for those 3-year-olds that we talked about earlier today, and so we were able to change that in a through 3. And then Oklahoma also has universal 4-year-olds and kindergarten, full-day kindergarten as a state mandate. So it was a nice seamless transfer for children to go from our programming into the public school system. Or a Head Start, or whatever the family chose that way. The participating providers receive financial support to cover the high standards of the program, and then with the expectation of that financial match. Our partners of the project, like Margie said, we serve over 2,500 children, and our collaborating partners range from Native American agencies, teen parents, early Head Start, 3 Educare programs, nonprofit, and tech programs. So we have a nice variety of collaborations, and I think that's a uniqueness of our program that makes it successful, because I know one of the things that has kind of been an undertone or overarching thing is flexibility, and that's one thing that Oklahoma Early Childhood Program tries to do, is look at the systems within the program and see how we can meet those with the existing systems and the management and so kind of like you said, we have a hands-off as supervisory, but we're also compliance and support. So that's kind of the make of it. We have a couple of quality pieces that I'd like to mention. So we have a combination of high standards for teacher qualifications, research-based standards for classroom environments, services to families, and providing ongoing professional development to the staff based on the latest early childhood research. So some of the assessments we currently use is CLASS, ITERS or ECHRS, depending on the classroom. And then we also use Teaching Strategies Gold, and as well as ASQ-SE and ASQ are the child measurements now. In some of our classrooms for 3-year-olds, we are using Bracken, and we're kind of playing with that a little bit as far as school readiness goes, and looking at other things. One of the things that I like to talk about is staff qualifications. Our lead teachers in our classrooms are bachelor degreed. And we use the standard of bachelor degree through the NAEYC standards as our guide. So when we're looking at what qualifies as a bachelor's degree, we go to that, to their statements and their guide for that. Teacher compensation, we ask the lead teacher, depending on what region they are in Oklahoma and what county, that they use the, sorry, I thought I broke up there. They use what the salary of the local school district is for teachers. So that's our compensation standard, and that gives us a bar to reach and some, I know, sorry. And then also we have family support that we provide funding for, and that's one of the things I'll talk about later as a challenge for childcare and that partnership. That's a new program for most childcares is family support and those comprehensive services. We have a caseload of 50 families per person, and then also we have the staff training, and then each program has to be NACE accredited, and we do give each partner time to get through those standards, and so it's not you have to be when you come on. We give them a 2-year period to work through that and do that. As professional development goes, what we decided to do, those of you that have had the PITC or infant toddler, the primary care system we call it, and so each site is assigned a primary care person that provides individualized training and technical assistance based on the site's needs and the staff. Each new staff member goes through a training of PITC, all 4 modules, their first year of employment, and that's provided by my office. And so it's uniform and everyone's hearing the same message. So our standards are kind of set in the bars for teachers who are new coming on to infant and toddler care. When I was at the Delaware table, one thing we were kind of talking about when I was listening to him is that for infants and toddlers teachers, it's very difficult to get that information and have people that are trained in true infant and toddler quality care. So that was one of the ways that we were addressing that in Oklahoma as well. One of the things that we also decided to do is keep compliance and professional development separate, or technical assistance. So the technical assistance and professional development team does not do compliance. So we can keep that relationship separate, and we have a separate compliance person that comes in and does that. So that's kind of an overview. I think we'll get into some more details as we go through with some of the questions that we've set. Like I say, we're starting our 9th year here in June of 2014, and we've learned a lot of lessons, made a few mistakes along the way, so I look forward to sharing them with everyone through our time together the next couple days.
All right, let's try one more time and see if you can hear it this way. Yes or no? Okay. Good evening. Talk closer. I'm going to look like I'm eating it. It's not ice cream. I wish it were. So to understand Pennsylvania's story, we need to go back a few years from the time that we became a funded early Head Start grantee. There were a lot of systems elements that were put into place successfully in our Commonwealth that sort of laid the foundation for our consideration of becoming an early Head Start grantee. One of the most significant was in 2006, the blending of the offices that support children birth through 3 with those offices that support children 3 through kindergarten entry into the Office of Child Development and Early Learning. And that centralized physically and conceptually all of the program supports, or the majority of program supports in Pennsylvania, into one physical space to further foster policy clarification, thinking around what's going on for young children in our state. Pennsylvania has a very intentional approach at developing a continuum of services that afford parents opportunities all along the continuum for either self-selected services themselves, where they're accessing materials and resources, or home visiting or center-based services through some of our state-funded initiatives. When the ERA application came out and it was recognized that states were eligible to apply, there was really a lot of thinking done around where the gaps were in infant toddler services in Pennsylvania, and how Pennsylvania in the form of OCDEL might apply to fill some of those gaps. So I don't want to focus on our role as the state as a grantee, and I'm sure that just wets everybody's whistle for tomorrow. But what I want to talk about is how we developed our partnerships, because they really have a lot of implications to those partnerships that will be developed through this new and very exciting initiative. Once we were notified that we were going to become a potential grantee, we had intended to follow our state's procurement process to enter into relationships with local providers. And that was based on local programs being eligible by either participating in our Commonwealth's Quality Rating and Improvement System, being a Head Start or other home visiting service entity in the communities that we were identifying as our service area, or being a child care that was interested in doing center-based services. When you look at the materials in your folder, you'll see that our model has changed over time. And where we started, we learned a lot of valuable lessons that have relevance to you all in thinking about this conceptually. We really developed a system that we look at data. We're very data rich in our state. And when we analyzed our data, we identified counties where there were either no early learning services for infants and toddlers, or there was such a scarcity contingent on the eligibility of children in those communities. And we targeted specific counties where we could partner with local entities. Partners applied to become our partner, or applicants applied to become our partner, and that began that discussion and dialogue about what the expectations were to be becoming a direct service provider in our model. One of our initial thinking was we recognized, and we did a lot of financial modeling about what a home-based program would look like versus what a center-based program would look like, and intended to pass through the majority of our funds with the idea that our local program partners would be able to fully implement the comprehensive services at their local level. So we have this term economy of scale, and we learned the lesson very quickly as we were finally funded for 128 slots. Those 128 slots were divided over 5 counties and 8 partners. Our smallest partner had 8 children. Our largest partner had 24 children. So we quickly identified through our ongoing process where we didn't reach that economy of scale tipping point. And we had to develop some internal resources to help support those providers continue to fulfill the comprehensive service model as we were moving through this endeavor together. That was a big lesson learned. And we struggled when we talked about how we were going to continue this. And so as a result, you'll see our second model where we have, through that self-evaluation and discussions with our governing structures, moved into serving 2 partners. And we'll talk a lot through the process that Margie would like to facilitate just some of those challenges and opportunities that we have. But again, there's a lot of lessons learned there about the partnering aspect and how you're thinking about entering into those relationships.
Okay, going to move on to questions. Thank you all very, very much. So during the planning phase, what data and strategies did you use to inform the design of your partnerships approach and to assess and secure strong child care partners? And Tracey, you want to start?
We're going to pass the mic again.
I wish, can we get the mics working? Or?
So, as again, I mentioned that we have a lot of data that we use. One of our reports that collects data at a very local, at the county level, and has since matured further, is our Octal Risk and Reach report, which looks at an...
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump like that. That scared me.
We're told to keep all of our mics on, so, okay. We'll keep going.
So we have a number of data inputs that we evaluated to make that decision. So you're all awake. I'm going to let my counterparts answer.
We turned ours off. We use 3 things to kind of look at our partners. The number one is we have a QRIS system. It's a 3-star is the highest we have in Oklahoma. So we reached out to those partners and then started working with that. We really found that if leadership was on board, quality was already in place, it was easy to move people forward and work with them. Another part of our grant is that we had an urban and a rural program. So we ended up having 9 urban programs and 12 rural. So I thought that was a nice balance for what we were serving. And then the other thing we looked at is the need in our state. And so when we were talking about poverty, we have 4,100 children, or 27% of our children, birth to 3, living at or below poverty levels. And then we have 4,300, or 28% of the children, between 100 to 200% of poverty levels. So we have a huge need in our state, and we only have 2,000 federally funded slots in Oklahoma. So you can see the gap between, so we really try to reach out to areas where the high need was, looking at those numbers. Another thing that our program did is we raised that bar to 185% of poverty. So we really reached some of the families that weren't being reached by other programs, and extended our services to the families that were kind of that in-between gap that sometimes gets left out. So those are some factors that we looked at.
So for our program, because it's the geographic area is small, right? Chicago, it's the city of Chicago. We have basically every neighborhood has demographics where we need to be serving families and children. And so we do have a states-wide system that uses data from Chapin Hall, where we look at neighborhoods with violent crime, with education levels of families, poverty levels, homeless families, all of those demographics we did look at actually this past year as a city to make sure that not only were we putting prevention programs in the neighborhoods where we most needed to be, but do we have also Head Start and 3 to 5 services. So we actually looked at the breadth of the city and had folks reapply this year using all of that demographic information. But the reality is every neighborhood in our city has families that we need to serve. So.
Just going to go here. So Hannah did a really nice job this afternoon of kind of laying out some of the differences in terms of policies between childcare and early Head Start. And the question for you all is, initially, what were some of your greatest challenges in terms of bridging those relationships and bridging understandings between early Head Start and childcare?
So I mentioned economy of scale already and making sure that our partners were adequately funded. The second piece was clearly identifying the roles of the grantee staff as well as our partner staff, which was a struggle initially to figure out who was doing what functions related to the Early Head Start grant and what they were doing related to their own program grant. That also led into some issues and challenges around branding and identity. What did they call their program? Who were the staff? Were they childcare staff? Were they home visiting staff? Were they early Head Start staff? And as simple as that seemed, it was very confusing when we first got started. Another challenge is shifting into, the earlier panel talked a lot about the differences in monitoring and that process of ongoing monitoring. So as we fully jumped into that ability as the grantee to be working with our partners and doing very engaging monitoring for quality improvement, that was a very big new feature of our relationship, because childcare, they weren't used to having people in their center having conversations with them, looking at records and files at the same frequency. And I think the other piece was, in our initial model, 7 of our 8 partners had no Head Start or early Head Start experience. We were developing those skills as we entered into this partnership. And so as they were learning the performance standards, as they were learning about our expectations in terms of reporting and being conscientious about deadlines and the fiscal aspect of the grant, that was a significant challenge as well.
I'm going to speak to the challenge about the community relationships that were for childcare. It was a paradigm shift for our partners from the regular service that they were used to delivering to the community partnerships and those relationships and engaging parents in a way that they hadn't before, possibly. So we started out small with 25 Head Start standards, and we really focused around those community relationship ones. So emergency and crisis intervention, looking at family partnerships and strengthening those goal setting and those onboarding with parents. And then also we looked at ways to engage the families. So we started parent training we used Incredible Years as part of our parent training program. A lot of the families or the childcare wasn't used to having as many or at all home visits. So that was a new area for us to venture with and help them feel comfortable with that. As many parent-teacher conferences as we wanted to have in our Head Start program. Also, we started doing things like lending libraries, getting more volunteers into the classroom, parent reading nights, things like that that really brought the families and that engagement level up. So we really felt like starting with health, nutrition, and those parent partnerships were a place that we could help the child care with a paradigm shift and getting closer to her early Head Start standards.
I guess I will just say ditto to everything that Amy said, but I will add one more thing. One of the things that we found in working with family child care providers, particularly those who weren't familiar with working with at-risk families, is that we really needed to do a lot of coaching to help them overcome feelings of frustration and judgment of parent behaviors. And so if you're thinking about family child care, it's great to pay particular attention to how you're going to support them through that process. So.
I think for us, when we talk about economies of scale, one of the things, we did a lot of lessons learned from our preschool program. And so we learned very quickly that if we had too few classrooms in the model, it wasn't going to work. So our basic minimum is 3 classrooms. We still have a few programs that have 2 classrooms. So this model is not necessarily a model for the 1 classroom program because of the comprehensive services around family engagement and this infant specialization. And I will say the infant specialization was a lesson learned, but also I think a good success of the program. In our Preschool for All program, we have qualified certified teachers. But their supervisors necessarily didn't have the specialization in early childhood. And so it's very hard to start talking about reflective practice and how you get into the caregiving relationship if your supervisor may not have some of that grounding. And so we put in our model that all of the programs would have a specialist in their site. And that actually paid off for us because we had a hope that we were going to have a lot of kind of tech and TA in our program. And as we were starting up our program, everybody knows kind of what happened in 2008. Money disappeared. But this model of having the specialist on site ended up being a blessing in disguise because that person was our tech and TA. We built those relationships with the infant specialist, and we continue to work with the infant specialist to do all of our quality engagement around kind of what's happening in the classroom and what kind of we see as the future of each of the programs. So it was something that was an accident, but also a happy finding for us.
How did you structure training and technical assistance to assist your child care partners to meet the Early Head Start curriculum and assessment and/or the comprehensive services standards?
We took the pre-service approach, and in our startup, pre-service in case you didn't hear that, we met with them frequently, and because our initial model was both home-based and center-based, we completed a TA plan where we utilized the Early Head Start technical assistance that was available, but then we also identified external TA that we wanted to bring in to help support those aspects of our model. In the beginning, and this has sort of been the example of our continuum, it was intensive and frequent and I would almost say constant feedback for the process. And it goes back in again to that idea of buy-in about I came from a different provider type. I understand my role in that provider type. I may have had training as a home-based provider or as a child care staff. Why are you training me again? And so it was just to make sure that we had addressed the elements that we deemed as important and that we felt fit into that overarching piece of understanding what Head Start, Early Head Start was. And then as we progressed on, we really started to use those individual professional development plans to help guide staff. For our center-based partners at the implementation, those were very familiar. For our existing home-based model providers, that was something new and unfamiliar. And so we had to further individualize our training depending on our model type that we started out with.
Well, in the beginning, we had a one-size-fits-all model because everyone was coming on new, and we felt like we needed to get terms and quality standards and kind of all have the same language we were speaking from. And then we have moved now into that individualized model I talked about. But we also included in there leadership training. So once a year we bring all the state leaders in, and then we also use outside resources to train leaders and develop our leaders and our providers. And then also we do family support training. We bring them in once a year, and all the family support come together and collaborate and use each other's resources, but also we help them develop their skills as well. Some of the topics that we've used, and these are topics I think we're all familiar with, but you think, kind of like you're saying, they think they already have, but you know, health and safety, and what does that mean in early Head Start standards? Professionalism, what does that mean in early Head Start standards? We did a lot of NAEYC training. Our state has early guidelines, I think like most of you guys do, so we did training around that. And then we also wanted them, because some of our partners weren't comfortable with assessments in their classroom, and I know you kind of talked about more touches in the room or more people in the room. So we did some trainings on what does ITERS mean, and what do those standards look like, what is class, and so they were comfortable on how they were being evaluated. Literacy and curriculum are the other ones. So they're fairly basic topics, but we just did a deeper dive for our partners and gave them another perspective on things they were already comfortable with.
When I think about tech and TA for us, I really do think about, I don't know if we were so heavy in the beginning, but we were more of a slow burn process. So we started out with, here's a little bit, let's exceed at that. Here's a little bit more, let's exceed at that, and so on and so forth. It's hard doing it that way because you walk in and you see things that you're scared. You're really like, what's the walker doing here? What are the bucket seats doing here? Like this is the tape in your head, right? And to take the step back and to say, okay, so these folks have been doing this for a long time, and their heart is in the right place. How do I find out the meaning of what's in their classroom? How do I find out how they started this work? And so, like, you know, in my head I have playing ban the bucket seats, but the reality is that provider bought those seats because she thought that was the best thing for her children. And so it's the conversation. The tech and TA for us is really a reflective process. So we have two kind of reflective processes. Our infant specialists come together. We have 3 different groups each month where we go through these kind of quality indicators. And then we really are lucky in this state because we have a group of people here who have been thinking about family engagement for years and years, not necessarily in center-based programs, but in home visiting. And so we've contracted with the Ounce to really help us think about what does family engagement look like for providers. Because the family's gonna walk in and say, I want childcare. And the family support's gonna come and say to them, hey, I'm here to support you. What does that mean? And so then they build this relationship, right? And then what happens is the family gets really comfortable very quickly and starts to just spill their guts because they have babies and they're tired and they're stressed. Every family, no matter where they are, has that experience. And then what comes out is all of those experiences, and then how does the child care provider, family support specialist deal with that? And so having a place for the family support specialist to process through was really important for us. And we're learning stuff every day about how they manage those relationships over time. But I think both of those reflective processes have been helpful for us. That's all touchy-feely good. I know a lot of people are thinking, but monitoring these folks, important. We did also do this alongside a monitoring process pretty intensely in the first 2 years, where there were providers that very quickly we knew it wasn't gonna work out. They couldn't hit the basic stuff, and we couldn't get to what was the heart. Like, what is it? Why are we doing this? Because it's some money that we're giving away. And what is it that we're trying to get to? And I think with that intensive monitoring process and then kind of the slow burn into the reflective groups, I think we're at a place where we can do some good work and where like the frame of the house is built. And now we want to like decorate it. We want to like do some stuff that could be pretty interesting.
So I was going to, Sue, just have you, is this working
No. They set it to cell phone, but I don't know. We don't have cell phones. Okay.
The Chicago program requires the child care center partners to implement a continuity of relationships model. So classroom teaching teams remain with their group of children from enrollment until the children transition to preschool. And I wanted to have Sue talk a little bit about that because it really goes to continuity of care, but there are enormous challenges that the child care partners have experienced.
So I'd like to do a shout out to the CLASP folks here, wherever they are in the room. I know that there are folks from CLASP here. Sorry. I think I said CLASP. Some great policy paperwork around this that I just really, we used in the beginning to think about what is continuity of care and continuity of relationships. And for us, it is the beginning and end. Because when we think about the work that we're doing, it's about the relationships that we all have and that children have. And we know what the brain research says. We know that children need stable, caring relationships over time. And we know we have an issue in this field. There's turnover, low wages, all this stuff. But we have a child care system based on moving children. And we know that's not right. And so when we started this, we said, that's the end and the beginning. Because there are a million reasons why we can't do continuity of relationships, but the one reason why we can is because we know it's good for children. So, at the very first meeting, we said continuity of relationships. At the very next meeting, we said continuity of relationships, and we did not stop talking about it. And then we had a focus group and we talked some more, and in about year 3, we said, we're gonna do it. And some programs said, okay, let's try it. So we had about 7 programs jump on board. And when we started the tech and TA on that, we were really focusing on 4 things that are really important. One is your enrollment system. So how do you make sure that the children that come in as infants stay with their group until they're in preschool, and how do you recruit families for that? The next is the professional development. So I'm not an infant teacher anymore. I'm a teacher of the children that I have in my group. The next piece that we kind of talked through was this idea of how do we roll this out with families, because families are going to be your biggest advocates. And then we talk a little bit about what does that moving day look like. And so for us, we actually broke it down for programs that they would choose a model, and we talk about it in this way. We say that you can choose a looping model, and we call it moving apartments. So you start out with your babies in an infant room, and when they get old enough, they're gonna move to the toddler room, to their new apartment. And then when they're old enough, they're gonna move to the 2-year-old classroom, and then they move in that 3rd year to preschool altogether, and they come back as infant teachers. We call that the 1-year lease. Then we have the other model, which is the 3-year lease, right? So you can do this in a couple of different ways. You can start out a group of babies together, and the room grows with the children, and you have to redecorate and relicense. A little tricky, but can be done. And then you have the traditional model, which is the mixed age, where you have children birth to 3 in a classroom, and the children go individually up to preschool for all. It's a little bit harder because you really do have to have a sophisticated teaching team. For most of our programs, they did choose the moving apartment model because it just fit with the kind of way that they were going to have to move through that process. We are now in the final push to the programs will all be doing this next year. So we'll have 51 programs in this model. And it's been a long, kind of hard journey, but we actually see that as the beginning then of our true professional development, because then we can talk with teachers and with staff about what it means to have children at the beginning of their life in your program and see them through that transition to preschool.
I'm cognizant of time, and I really want to open this up to audience questions. So I'm just going to ask each panelist to add anything else that they want to say, any lesson learned, piece of advice, and then we'll start to take audience questions.
So one final piece that I would add is the piece about communication. And in my Head Start world, because that's where I grew up, was Head Start, I think in federal language and communicate with other people like I'm talking to people that understand what I'm talking about. In this partnership, a lot of our partners have only ever had state experience. And so even though you might be saying grant, contract, those meanings don't have the same meaning. And so it really is a two-way street, and establishing the foundations for those discussions is important for your partnerships to be successful, among other things.
My final thought was, when looking at partners, see them as unique as their programs are, honor what they bring to the table, and allow the process some time. I think that you really talk about that a lot, Sue. It does take a lot of time to move people forward, and if you do the reflective process and give them that time, they're much better partners in the end. And try as much as you can to let new policies work within their current systems they have. And then one final thought that I didn't get to talk a lot about, but when looking at partners, look at profit and nonprofit programs differently, because they have different unique challenges. And so when you're setting up budgets and things like that, there really are some things that help them be successful and unsuccessful.
Just a couple things that I will add to that. And one is a lesson that I think I alluded to earlier that I learned very quickly, is that as you're putting your grant together and looking at your implementation timelines, really think about how much time you need to build in there for that relationship building, because it is some considerable time. The second thing is just to really think about is your documentation systems and how it ties into your monitoring systems. I mean, we had to do a lot of work with the family child care providers on setting up documentation systems that really worked for them, but gave us the we had the information that we needed. So it really requires a thoughtful process between the parties to get to a good place.
I think for me, build on what you've got in your state. Our Illinois table's got folks around it who for years have built advocacy, built city departments, built university classes, built quality rating systems, built infant toddler credentials. Those folks have been doing it for years, and when you have an issue that comes up, use them to think through problems, because in my experience, most of those problems, they can be solved. It's just how do you use the collective wisdom of the folks that you have around the table and find people who are really passionate about this. I mean, I'm one person up here, but I'm my colleague Rima Malhotra, and we dream about this together. And I think if you can find somebody out there who can do that with you, you're going to succeed. Like you will succeed, because that's the spark of why we do this work. So find that person or people that will help you in that process.
Thank you. We want to take questions, and Susan, if you want to, you have the mic there, and I'll pass down the mic, and if you all can, you can direct your questions to, yeah, please. Yes, Mina.
First, it's on. Go ahead. I'd like to thank the panel. It was really a terrific sort of survey of different models, and hopefully we can publish some of those for everybody who was not here to see. Can you hear me? Okay, it's on. Can you hear me now? Yeah, better? No? Okay, there we go. So thank you again. It was just a terrific panel. While I was sitting here, somebody texted me and said, gee, this sounds, not your panel, this was sort of commenting on the day earlier, like it's all slanting towards states being the applicants. So, and I know the organizers did not want that to be, so I just want to offer like 4 thoughts to states that may want to be applicants that I didn't quite hear in the panel, or maybe you said it, but I didn't. One was that actually when Tracey said the terms don't mean the same thing, when I hear and I remember what we talked about as state systems, it's very different than what in Head Start grant is a system. Whether it's the monitoring, whether it's the professional development, it's all quite different. the other thing that I was kind of, I don't know, I noted that we did not have the most representatives of the most vulnerable children here. We did not have migrant, I mean, Yvette kept mentioning the migrant seasonal and the Alaska Native American Indian, I think they need to be included in any state's discussion. So on the big item issues, the whole idea, as I get it, of this partnership is to get as many children as possible into the youngest children into high-quality settings. So when it comes to the money, people, you know, I wonder when I saw Tracey's thing with the keys in the chart, how much money goes directly to the programs and how much goes to the administration. And the reason that I'm asking that, and you don't have to give me exact figures, I was just in a state where we were discussing McVie, which is the home visiting, and this was the state where the local people really helped us do some great local publicity that was helpful in getting the McVie extended. So I was like saying, oh, thank you so much, this was great, you did that. And they said, we're not going to apply next year because we only get a 2% administration. So I'm saying, okay, so if the administrative fee is limited, when it gets divided between the state and the next level and the next level, what happens?
So in Pennsylvania, Yasmina, the Commonwealth does not keep any money at the state level. We pass it all out. We talk in terms of 2 direct service partners and 1 managing implementing partner. The funds that go to our managing implementing partner support 1.5 full-time equivalents, and the rest gets sent out to our 2 partners to implement the program, around $9,100 a child. So that's our model, and we look to the state's contribution to the grant and the work that we're doing, as well as some other supports that come from the Key as being part of our non-federal match, because they definitely are needed to make the grant successful, but we're not keeping that money at the state level in our model.
That's a great model.
In the Oklahoma model, we hold ourselves to that 14% that Early Head Start has as administrative for our partners and their budgets that they submit. And then the same as you, that the state just passes through the funds, and then CAP passes through the funds. And then as administrative level at CAP, we have 3.5 staff.
Almost no money is administrative for us. We have 2 salaries for the prevention initiative, and then some tech and TA that we do for the family engagement. All of the money goes out to the programs directly as a vendor, and it's $8,000 per child.
And the programs need the money to monitor and have all the systems in place.
Yeah,
so
the money
great.
goes directly to the programs, and it lays on top of that child care dollar, which is nice.
Great. And then the last thing that, the last concern that I just was sort of hoping to share with everybody is, and again, I think Tracey mentioned how the names that people are sort of thinking, what do we call this and what do we call that? We find that the actually Head Start as a brand name, as a mobilizing kind of a thing is very effective. And, you know, we have to be careful not to lose that. The other day, we had, and governors are notorious for liking to put their name on it. I think you all know that. I mean, I was in New Jersey when CCDBG was called New Jersey Cares for Kids, and I know there is a Smart Start.
I would love to be able to have other people ask some questions, if you don't mind. I mean,
okay, so I mean, those are the cautions to the audience, because I didn't know that we'd have a whole group conversation next. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the panelists? I would imagine, yes, Grace?
Hi, can you talk a little bit more about comparability of pay? Can you talk a little bit more about comparability of pay? I think I heard Oklahoma say you use the public school system, and obviously comparability of pay is going to figure into the overall budget. Right. So I'm very interested to hear a little bit more and homes versus centers.
Sure. We have two models. We have one where they had existing programs, and then we have one where we call it expansion, where they add classrooms, and so they set their budgets up either way. So if it's with the funds they need to bring the quality up for the lead teacher pay that's comparable to the state teacher in their area, then that's what they bill in their budget. Or if it's a brand new classroom, and then they look at what that teacher. The one thing that I've noticed through time is, yes, and I know this is on your mind, so I'm just going to put it out there, is that what about the other teachers in the program if not everybody's being funded by that? And what I've noticed through time is the salary scales have adjusted up, and programs have loosened other money because of these resources that are coming to these classrooms, and it's helped teacher pay across the whole center. So not that it's an overnight fix, and not that those things happen, and there's some rub in the beginning, but also the teachers have the qualifications, and they're doing more work to meet the Head Start standards in some cases than the other, if you have a mixed model and it's not the whole program. We only have 1 or 2 partners like that. Most of them are the full site.
For family childcare homes, obviously it was the CCDF rate. It was enhanced. And then for each contracted child, it was about, I think it was, when we ended the program, it was about $55 to $60 more per week per child.
For us, it's kind of a mixed bag in the sense we do have minimums that we require programs to pay their staff. And for Preschool for All, we have a licensed teacher, and there's a minimum the school district requires that the programs pay. Unfortunately, because we're lifting all of the birth to 3 staff up to what we call an infant toddler credential, not everybody's there yet. We're hoping when we can get a bachelor's level teacher with what we call a level 5 infant toddler credential, we'll make those equivalent for PFA or the Preschool for All and the birth to 3 program. We're not quite there yet because it's going to take some time because we have a new infant toddler credential in the state.
My question has to do with monitoring. How did you guys, when you aren't implementing all of the Head Start and Early Head Start regs, how are you getting through your triennial monitorings? Because we know those are not fun.
We developed a very comprehensive monitoring plan that, because our partners are unique, we individualized to our current model that we have with 2 partners. That plan denotes who at each partner organization is responsible for what aspect on sort of a day-to-day program level, and then the content staff that's supported at the state level by the grant has additional monitoring responsibilities. Those frequencies are identified. When we just completed our triennial review this current year, we have both of our partners had a portion or a full team at each site, as well as in our central office, which is in between the 2 grantees. So it was a larger team for our model. They spent 2 to 3 days at each partner site, and we had a lot of coordination, and we were very thankful to be able to talk about the model because we were a little out of the box, and to be able to give those team members the thinking about who they should be speaking to at each partner site and who on our state team they should be speaking to assure that they had that information ahead of time so they weren't wasting time when they were on site because they had a lot to look at.
We have a couple different things in place. We had a provider agreement, which also kind of served as an MOU. And then we created an online reporting system monthly that they do different components that are asked. They report on those, their attendance rates, their teachers' qualifications, things of that nature that are in the provider agreement. And then they have quarterly visits on site from the compliance person unless they show at risk from those monthly online visits. And then that'll prompt an extra visit in there. And then they have TA monthly visits.
Is it Amy? Amy. Your program, though, isn't... I mean, your program goes to 185%. It's not strictly Head Start.
No, it's not. We just use some of the Head Start standards. Tracey's program is the only Head Start part, pure Head Start person.
Right.
Yeah, we have some luxury there.
Can you talk about how you structured your governance?
Yes, I can. We, again, lessons learned. Our policy council, we recognized right away that we had to have one policy council for our grants. And again, if you look at the information, our 2 remaining partners are about 308 miles apart. And our policy council is consistent of 3 parent representatives from each partner site, as well as a community rep. And then we have 1 community rep that represents sort of the central area of the Commonwealth for a 9-person policy council. We set aside funds annually for those policy council meetings to occur in person, but policy council votes on their meeting schedule and locations. And what tends to happen is they meet locally in their partner locations and they join each other virtually. We have gone through a lot of iterations with Policy Council to go quarterly, but we're on a bi-monthly schedule right now because we just need to be meeting more frequently. And this is a place where I think we're starting to see a lot of success because we started out with a brand new policy council. We didn't have any parents to sort of give peer-to-peer mentoring about those lessons learned and what their role and responsibility was in governance. So this was a place we accessed TA, and we also turned to some of our peers in the state who allowed our parents to talk to their parents at their programs to understand more about what their role was. So that's how we do our policy council. And then we have a 5-member governing board, and it's 3 community-based members and a parent from each program that sits on our board.
Kathy, why don't you talk about the family child care?
With family child care, the same thing. On our policy council, they had seats on our policy council. We're very connected to our governance board. Often we would bring our family child care providers in to do presentations to our governance board. So we really kept them, you know, in the whole governance loop. I have to say it was probably one of the easier pieces of the puzzle. It was fun. They really enjoyed it. So you know, we had a lot of success around that.
Time for one more question? I think.
Tracey, hello. Hello? Okay. This is for you. Your FTE person that is supported at the state level, is that position funded by Early Head Start funds? And if so, is it based on the state payment plan? So even though it's funded by the federal government, is it based on what your current state structure is for your pay?
It's not a state employee, okay. And it's one and a half full-time equivalents. It's actually 3 people. We cobbled together funding to support the balance of their positions. So given the scope of our project, we needed to have that level of support, and they're not state employees.
I think we had one more question. The woman, yeah, right there.
Hi, I'm really excited about the way you talked about following the science and really developing those relationships. And I'm wondering then, we talk so much about structural quality, especially in our quality rating systems. How are you looking at measuring, if that's the term you want to use, those child-teacher interactions, which are the base of what you're doing?
Good question. So one of the things that happened when we moved to a mandatory system is that the folks that were developing the quality rating system, we got together and we decided what are the standards and kind of how do they fit into Head Start, how do they fit into Early Head Start, how do they fit into Prevention Initiative and Preschool for All. We aligned all of the things that we were thinking about. So like if you're talking about developmental assessment, we were inclusive of all of those different programs into that system so that when a prevention initiative program went into the quality rating system, if they were following the guidelines, they would have that quality indicator. The state has set up for classroom interactions, there's a couple different choices. So for us it is the ITERs and the class toddler. For many of our programs who did the non-voluntary system, they've already gone through that process because they wanted kind of to have that as kind of a bonnet, something in their bonnet. For the programs that haven't done that, we're going to be kind of jumping off into that this next year and really focusing in on pieces of those particular scales as it relates to continuity of relationships. So it's one of the things that's tough is that if you're a 2-year-old teacher, right, and you're moving into an infant classroom, I'm not really sure about kind of the sanitization. And so we want to have that conversation about quality as the teachers are in a level and in a place of being uncomfortable and really talking about how do we kind of begin to build practice. Because I think there's a lot of, and I heard this a lot from my panelists, is that I know it. I've been doing this. And it's true, they do, providers know a lot of stuff, but we get stuck. We get stuck, and this is the way how it should look. And I think because it's a perfect storm in the sense that we're using the quality rating system to get at some of these things that we know are problems in some of our classrooms. And I don't know if that makes sense, but we are shaking it up. And we're using continuity of relationships as the way to talk about what quality interactions will look like. Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Not that I'm promoting it, but we also use the RNet to see teacher interactions, and so that's something that can be done fairly quickly.
Anything else? On a different topic?
Sure.
She gave me the mic. I'm going to finish with it. I want to come back around to something that we were talking about, governance. We talked about governance and how that fits into role definition and the communication strategy. As regardless of who you are, if you are reaching out to work with programs that typically don't include parents in their program governance, meaning in decision making as active partners, we talk about parent engagement. It doesn't necessarily have the same meaning to state-funded programs. And so that was a challenge that we spent some time working through about what those partners' responsibilities were to have those conversations about program direction and sharing information with them and posting information for parents to see that they weren't quite comfortable with. So as you're thinking about expanding and what relationship you're developing with, and I talk about you, but or as you're going back to foster these partnerships in your states, that's a piece that's often amiss because people talk about parent engagement, but it's again sort of a incongruent definition between the two provider types. It's important.
Thank you so much to our panelists. I'm going to thank you.